Jordan Peterson just got completely exposed in his most embarrassing interview yet, and I'm about to show you exactly how this academic grifter manipulates his audience with word salad and fake intellectual superiority. Piers Morgan asks him a simple question: do you believe in God? And Peterson's response is so pathetic it's actually hilarious. He literally says it's nobody's business while simultaneously claiming he prays, always, to the spirit that protects from hell. But here's the kicker: this is the same guy who built a multi-million-dollar empire telling other people how to live their lives, but he can't answer a basic yes or no question about his own beliefs. I'm about to break down every single manipulation tactic Peterson uses in this interview, from his fake humility to his constant Holocaust references, and by the end of this video, you'll never be able to listen to him the same way again. Stick around because what he says about prayer at the 8-minute mark will blow your mind, and not in a good way.
I want to talk to you about your new book, We Who Wrestle with God.
Yep.
A lot of your fans, there's all sorts of Jordan Peterson groups that you can join who debate whether you really believe in God or not. So let's just get it on the table. Do you believe in God?
I don't think that's anybody's business. I think it's the most private question you can ask someone, but then I would say also, what's the right response to that? By their fruits you will know them. How's that?
Well, let me ask you a different question then. Do you think there is a God?
I'm terrified that there might be.
Right from the opening, Peterson reveals his entire playbook: dodge every direct question by claiming it's either too complex or too personal, then immediately contradict yourself. This is the man who built his career telling other people how to live, who wrote books about life rules, who charges hundreds of dollars for people to hear his opinions on existence, but suddenly when asked a simple yes or no question, he's overcome with privacy concerns. It's like a porn star suddenly becoming modest about nudity. The guy who made millions telling people to clean their rooms is now clutching his pearls about theological privacy. Then he says he's terrified that God might exist. What kind of response is that? Either you believe in God or you don't. Normal people don't live in constant terror of their own theological positions. But Peterson has turned intellectual cowardice into a brand, positioning his obvious neuroses as signs of moral superiority. It's the intellectual equivalent of a participation trophy. Everyone gets to be special, even the guy who can't answer whether he believes in God.
Piers, how's that? And I'm not trying to be a smartass when I'm making that comment either. Like they say, it's an Old Testament saying, I believe, that the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, and that is actually about as true a statement as you could manage in such a short phrase. And people have congratulated me. I was at the Buckley Institute last night. They were congratulating me on my courage, and I think, and I said this last night, it's like, you guys don't understand. It has nothing to do with courage. I'm just afraid of different things than the people who lie. And I'm afraid, for example, of what happens when you lose control of your tongue.
Peterson has perfected the art of making himself sound heroic while saying absolutely nothing. He's not brave, he's just afraid of different things. What a revelation. This is like saying you're not a coward, you just have a unique relationship with fear. He's constructed this entire mythology around himself where his obvious inability to give straight answers is actually moral superiority. The man who became famous for refusing to use preferred pronouns is now positioning himself as someone who's too spiritually advanced to commit to basic beliefs. And notice how he can't even tell a simple story without name dropping. He was at the Berkeley Institute, people were congratulating him on his courage. It's constant self-aggrandizement disguised as humility.
And I said that back in 2016 when I first opposed the Canadian government. And people were, congratulating me. It's like, well, you're so brave to stand up to the government. It's like, I'm nowhere near as afraid of the government as I am of what happens when people lose control of their tongue. I studied totalitarianism since I was 13 years old, in depth. And I know what happens when people lose control of their tongue. What happens is everything goes to hell.
Here we go with Peterson's favorite credential. He studied totalitarianism since he was 13. What does that even mean? Was teenage Peterson poring over Stalin's writings while his classmates were playing video games? This is such obvious resume padding, it's embarrassing. Every pseudo-intellectual claims to have been studying their field since childhood, as if being a nerdy kid somehow validates their adult opinions. It's like claiming you're a master chef because you've been eating food since you were born. The man literally cannot discuss anything without positioning himself as a lifelong expert who's sacrificed his youth to understanding deep mysteries that lesser minds cannot grasp. Then he delivers this dramatic proclamation about losing control of your tongue, as if this is some profound insight instead of just saying, words have consequences.
And I mean that metaphysically. I might even mean it theologically, but you can just say, don't even bother with that.
But what's fascinating...
Let's just mean it practically.
But what's interesting is, I completely agree with you, by the way, and you are the most open book of almost anyone I've ever interviewed, right to the point I asked you if you believe in God. I didn't actually know what you were going to say, but for some reason you're reluctant to say. Why are you reluctant?
Well, okay, let's walk along that. Well, because it's not a well-posed question. It's too complicated an issue to be dealt with like that. You step into instant traps just by accepting the question. So I'll show you what I mean. So the first thing I would say is, what do you mean by believe? Like, do you think that a statement about the existence of God is something like a scientific theory?
This is Peterson's signature move: turn every simple question into a graduate-level philosophy seminar. Morgan asks if he believes in God, and suddenly we need to deconstruct the epistemological foundations of belief itself. It's intellectual masturbation disguised as profundity. Normal people understand what "do you believe in God" means. It's not a trick question designed to trap unwary philosophers. But Peterson has built his entire career on pretending that obvious questions are actually impossibly complex puzzles that only he is sophisticated enough to properly address. It's like being asked if you want cream in your coffee and responding with a 20-minute lecture on the nature of desire and the phenomenology of dairy products. The man who gives definitive answers about everything from lobster hierarchies to dragon symbolism suddenly can't handle a basic theological question because it's not well posed.
Do you think it's a list of facts? Is it a factual question? Does God exist or not? Is it a factual question like you're asking about whether a cup on a table exists or a plate on a table, an artifact in a room? What do you mean by this? What do you mean by believe? I'll stake my life on the proposition that God exists. How's that?
Well,
is that an answer? Because that's the right answer.
I would ask you, here's my supplementary. Do you ever pray?
Always.
Who do you pray to?
The spirit that protects you from hell.
Now we're getting to the heart of Peterson's con game. He prays always to the spirit that protects you from hell, but he can't say whether he believes in God because that would be too simple. This is having your cake and eating it too. He gets to sound spiritual and profound while never actually committing to anything specific. It's like claiming you're always dieting while constantly eating donuts. The man prays constantly but isn't sure God exists. That's not spiritual sophistication, that's just intellectual cowardice dressed up in fancy language. Either prayer works because there's something to pray to, or it doesn't and you're just talking to yourself. Pick one. But Peterson won't, because commitment to clear positions would undermine his brand as the guy who's too deep for simple answers.
But that, many people would say, is God.
Hey, sounds good to me. And so you might say, well, I said I pray always, so what does that mean? I'm trying to say the clearest words I can say. And I do that by paying attention. I'm listening to the words and feeling them as I move along, thinking, is that a firm foundation in the morass? Is that a bridge over the abyss? Is that word the right word?
This might be the most delusional statement in the entire interview. Peterson thinks he's speaking clearly. The man who just spent 10 minutes avoiding a yes or no question thinks he's a model of clear communication. He's turned verbal diarrhea into a philosophy. His idea of clarity is apparently to take simple concepts and wrap them in so much pseudo-intellectual packaging that they become incomprehensible. It's like claiming you're being helpful by giving someone directions to the store via a detailed explanation of quantum mechanics. And listen to this mystical nonsense about bridges over the abyss. He's describing basic word choice like he's navigating some spiritual minefield. The emperor has no clothes, but he's convinced himself he's wearing the finest silk.
I do that when I'm writing. I do that when I'm talking. And I do that because I don't want to be in the abyss. And the pathway over the abyss is the truth. Now, with regards to belief in God, you might say, and I know that you're not particularly religiously inclined, at least that's the theory. It's like, well, you have a character, Piers. Everyone has a character. You could say that would be the spirit of Piers Morgan. And then we might say, well, let's inquire into that spirit. If you were a hedonist, then the spirit that would be Piers Morgan would be your hedonistic whims. And that would be your God.
Peterson has now moved into full-blown word salad territory. Everyone has a spirit that could be their God. This is just new age nonsense dressed up in academic language. He's basically saying that whatever you value most becomes your God, which is such a watered-down definition of divinity that it becomes meaningless. By this logic, someone obsessed with stamp collecting is worshipping the god of philately. It's intellectual relativism taken to its absurd extreme. Everything is God, therefore nothing is God. This is what happens when you try to sound profound about subjects you're clearly confused about yourself.
I would say if you're a noble person, then your spirit is something elevated above your mere whims. And then there's the spirit that's inculcated within you. It's a consequence, perhaps, of your socialization, but in a more sophisticated way, it's actually a consequence of the spirit that you've allowed, as a consequence of your choices, to dwell within you. And that spirit has a nature. It might be allied with the truth, it might be allied with falsehood. If it's allied with the truth, it's a manifestation of what has been considered traditionally the Logos. The more you're aligned with the truth, the more your spirit is an avatar of the Logos. And that's just, it's true. It's religiously true, as it turns out, but it's also technically true. It's technically true.
See, I had a debate.
And so I'm making that case in the new book.
And there it is, Peterson's favorite word, logos. He throws this around like it's some kind of philosophical trump card, but it's just pretentious window dressing. The logos is basically just a fancy way of saying the truth or reason, but Peterson uses it because it sounds more impressive than admitting he's just talking about being honest. It's the academic equivalent of using utilize instead of use. It doesn't add meaning, it just makes you sound like you're trying too hard. This is Peterson's entire brand. Take simple concepts, wrap them in classical terminology, and pretend you've discovered something profound. And of course he's plugging his new book, because everything always comes back to the grift.
Right, so I had a debate with Richard Dawkins about this, who was a bit disingenuous with me because he sat with me for a whole show, seemed to enjoy it, thanked me very much for it, and then called me a fool afterwards in some podcast. So I know you've had a few run-ins with him, and it doesn't surprise me. But what I said to Dawkins was, because I was raised a Catholic, I was given spiritual guidance for several years by Catholic nuns, and I do believe in God. And the reason I said to him is that no human brain can really explain to me, or anybody, what was there before nothing. So if you believe in a Big Bang Theory, well, what was there before that? Because I don't think any human brain has that power to explain or answer that question. To me, it makes perfect sense. There should be some being, entity, something which is superior to a human brain. And I would think that someone with your brain would think that too, because there are questions we simply can't answer.
Okay, three things about that. So the first is, that's the argument by design, that things are so complex and sophisticated that cries out for the hypothesis of something like a creator. I'm not a big fan of the argument by design. I can see its advantages, but it isn't the primary argument as far as I'm concerned. So the Big Bang proponents have a problem because it's a tenet of the Big Bang Theory that the laws of physics themselves break down at the point of the singularity, and that would be the point just before the Big Bang. And when you say the laws of physics, the existence of space and time even, is unknowable prior to the Big Bang, you're basically positing a miracle at the beginning of existence. And so if you get to have your miracle, there's no reason the religious types can't have theirs. You might argue about what the miracle needs to be, and I think that's an argument that has to be had. I don't like the argument by design. I like the argument by conscience better. So the argument by conscience, which is another string of classic theological thought, is that something dwells within you that aligns you with the spirit of reality. And it's the still small voice within that was identified first by the prophet Elijah.
Peterson rejects the argument by design for God's existence, but prefers the argument by conscience, which is just saying that your inner voice is God. This is basically just dressed up narcissism. Your conscience is divine. Your internal monologue is a manifestation of the eternal logos. This is exactly the kind of thinking that leads to messianic complexes. Peterson has convinced himself that his own thoughts are direct communications from the divine realm. It's the ultimate ego trip disguised as humility. Instead of believing in an external God, he's made himself into a direct channel for divine wisdom. And notice how he always has to demonstrate his theological knowledge. He can't just say, inner voice. He has to reference the prophet Elijah to show you how well read he is.
And it was part of a transformation in the religious viewpoint, in historical terms, that moved the notion of God from something like Baal, B-A-A-L, a nature god, the god of storms and earthquakes, of what would you say, remarkable and awe-inspiring natural phenomena, to the voice within that can, if you attend to it, align you with the structure of reality itself, that internal voice being a manifestation of God. And I think that's an extremely powerful argument, and I think it's right. And I'll tell you something about Dawkins' work that's very interesting. So Dawkins has pointed out that an organism has to be a microcosm of its environment in order to survive. And I would say the voice of conscience within us is the most unerring manifestation of the microcosm within. And I think you can make an extraordinarily powerful biological case for that, and I've done that in this new book. So I think Dawkins' argument invalidates his epistemology.
Yeah, I agree.
I really believe that.
But what do you think? I mean, you've had moments in your life in recent years where I would imagine you have faced the prospect of potentially dying. And in those moments, what have you felt, and what do you think happens to you? If you do die, or you had died, what did you imagine might happen to you?
Well, I had lots of moments, years in the last few years where dying would have been an absolute relief. And had that been accompanied by the complete cessation of my being, I would have been perfectly content with that. There are things that are far worse than dying. So if you're only terrified of dying, you've hardly begun to plumb the depths of existential catastrophe.
Peterson loves these dramatic proclamations that sound profound but are actually just obvious. Yes, there are things worse than dying. Thank you for that groundbreaking insight, Professor. But watch how he uses this to dodge the actual question about what happens after death. Instead of addressing mortality directly, he pivots to his favorite topic, how much he's suffered and how deep his understanding of human misery is. It's classic Peterson, turn every question into an opportunity to demonstrate his superior grasp of existential horror. The man can't discuss death without making it about his own personal struggles and superior wisdom. Even his suicidal ideation becomes a flex about his philosophical sophistication.
Death is fairly...
You just don't have an imagination.
What could be worse than dying?
Being a prison guard at Auschwitz?
But you'd still be alive, even if you were witnessing horror. Is not death the
ultimate...
ultimate...
Oh no, I'm thinking perpetrating it.
Right. You mean
how about being an Auschwitz guard? How about being an Auschwitz guard who really enjoyed his job? How about that? That's worse than death, as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
I mean that.
No, I see that.
That's hell, man.
Yeah, it's a living hell.
That's hell.
Peterson cannot discuss anything without eventually bringing up the Holocaust. It's his go-to reference for ultimate evil, which would be fine if he didn't use it to avoid answering direct questions. Morgan asks about death and the afterlife, and Peterson immediately jumps to Nazi concentration camps. This is intellectual deflection at its most obvious. He's so terrified of taking a clear position on anything that he hides behind the most extreme historical examples he can think of. It's like being asked about your favorite color and responding with a lecture about the moral implications of the final solution. And notice how he keeps repeating himself. That's hell, man. Yeah, it's a living hell as hell. Like he's trying to convince himself as much as the audience.
Yeah, I agree.
Mm-hmm.
But do you think think there's an actual hell, Jordan? Is there somewhere that people like that go to, which is hell?
Oh, definitely. Now, what relationship that has to what happens to you when you die, I have no idea. I mean, I don't think anybody's in a position to speak about what's truly beyond our ken, let's say. I don't think we understand consciousness at all. We don't understand time. We don't understand the relationship between finitude and the infinite landscape that surrounds us. That's all a great mystery, and I tend to leave that alone because I try not to speak about things that I can't speak about.
This is Peterson's ultimate escape hatch, claim that everything is too mysterious for human comprehension, therefore his confusion is actually wisdom. We don't understand consciousness, we don't understand time, we don't understand the relationship between finitude and infinity. It's the intellectual equivalent of throwing your hands up and saying, God works in mysterious ways. But Peterson has made a career out of explaining consciousness, time, and human existence to paying audiences. So either he's been fraudulently taking people's money to explain things he admits he doesn't understand, or he's just using faux humility to avoid taking positions he might be criticized for. The man who wrote 12 Rules for Life suddenly can't speak about life's biggest questions. The guy who lectures about the meaning of existence for a living claims he doesn't understand existence. It's breathtaking intellectual dishonesty.
But does hell exist? It's like, study history and see if you can figure it out for yourself. I mean,
does heaven exist?
There's nothing that's more obvious than that hell exists.
So does heaven exist?
Mao's China was hell.
Right, but so you're talking about hell on earth, but do you believe there's a hell after death?
Like I said, I don't speculate about such things. That's where my ignorance finds its, what would you say? That's where my knowledge finds its limit. I'm concerned enough about what I'm doing right now, right here, and leaving the rest of that. And, you know, so I have to leave it at that. The hell that I see as a potential on earth is sufficient as a deterrent. And it's of sufficient reality. You know, you can ask, well, is it eternal? Well, I would say, well, look, all totalitarian states are variants on a theme, let's say, and that theme persists. All archetypal stories are eternal. Everything that happened in the Bible happened and is happening and will continue to happen forever. It's part of the eternal human story. It's hyper real. And heaven and hell are part of that.
Peterson has now fully descended into mystical gibberish. Biblical events are eternal and always happening. This is the kind of thing that sounds profound at 2 a.m. in a college dorm room but falls apart under any scrutiny. What does it even mean for something to be hyper-real? This is pseudo-philosophical word salad designed to make simple concepts sound impossibly complex. He's basically saying that stories have timeless themes, which is true but hardly revolutionary. But Peterson can't just say, stories have universal themes, because that would be too straightforward. Instead, he has to wrap it in this mystical language about eternal recurrence and archetypal permanence. It's the intellectual equivalent of using a flamethrower to light a candle.
What that means in the final analysis, I don't know. I mean, I think you asked in there, you know, hell is real, is heaven real? It's like, well, heaven is as far away from hell as you can get. That's a good way of thinking about it. I've spent my whole life trying to determine how you get as far away from being a camp guard at Auschwitz who enjoys his job as possible. And one of the things I've realized in recent years, for example, is that you are far from that if you're engaging in your interactions with the world in the spirit of voluntary play. You know, and we're playing during this conversation, and Joe Rogan plays on his podcast all the time, and if you're in a playful state with your wife, your marriage is optimized, and the state of play is the opposite of tyranny. And that's why it says in the Gospels that if you want to enter the kingdom of heaven, you have to become like a little child. So you want to reinstate that open wide-eyed acceptance of life that is the precursor to voluntary play.
Peterson has now made his entire life philosophy about not being a Nazi, which is setting the bar pretty low for moral achievement. Most people manage to avoid becoming concentration camp guards without making it their life's work. But Peterson has turned "don't be literally Hitler" into a sophisticated philosophical system. And his solution is voluntary play. This is what happens when you overthink simple moral concepts. Normal people understand that you should be kind and honest without needing to reference the Holocaust as a cautionary tale. But Peterson has built his entire brand on making obvious moral truths sound like profound discoveries that only he was smart enough to figure out.
You want to develop your character to the point where that's part and parcel of your life on an ongoing basis, and that's allowing that spirit of the Logos to inhabit you. That's another way of thinking about it. And you can certainly aid that with prayer. You know, people don't understand. People think of God as, the joke is, a cosmic butler. You pray to have your wishes granted. It's like, he's not a genie. You want to pray? It's like, pray about your stupidity. Here's a prayer that'll work for sure. You want to see if prayer works? Here's one. This will work. Sit on the edge of your bed. Ask yourself, what bloody stupid thing do I continue to do that's making my life more miserable than it has to be, and everyone else's life around me, that I could give up, that I would give up?
This is Peterson's entire philosophy in a nutshell, basic self-improvement advice dressed up as divine revelation. Stop doing stupid things that make your life worse isn't a prayer, it's just common sense. But Peterson has repackaged obvious life advice as spiritual wisdom. This is like claiming you've discovered a revolutionary diet plan that consists of eating less and exercising more. The man has built an empire on telling people to clean their rooms and stop doing self-destructive things, then convince them this is profound spiritual guidance. It's the ultimate grift, charging people money to tell them things their grandmother could have told them for free.
But you have to really want the answer. So you open yourself up in humility to a revelation. You'll get an answer. It won't be one you want. That's how you'll know it's true. But if you act on it, then your life will improve. And that's a proper prayer.
Yeah.
That's what you do. Like, in a metaphysical sense, the Christian insistence that you should be aware of your sins, which is in a sense an existential burden, is also the idea that you should attend to your own inadequacies and admit to them, because in doing so, you open up the possibility that something better can make itself manifest within you. And there's no doubt that that's the case. That's, for sure, that's true. But you have to do it in humility. And you have to be looking. That's why you're supposed to take the mote out of your own eye instead of worrying about the beam in your neighbor's eye. It's like, there's something about you that's stupid you could fix.
Yeah.
And God will tell you what it is if you want him to, so to speak.
What we've witnessed in this interview is the complete intellectual collapse of Jordan Peterson's carefully constructed persona. Stripped of his usual academic setting and forced to answer direct questions, Peterson reveals himself to be exactly what his critics have always claimed: a pseudo-intellectual charlatan who has built his career on making simple concepts sound impossibly complex. The man who positioned himself as a fearless truth-teller can't even commit to basic theological beliefs. The supposed enemy of postmodern relativism has created his own version of relativism where everything is simultaneously true and meaningless. The clinical psychologist who built his brand on precise thinking can't give a straight answer about whether he believes in God, the most fundamental question of human existence. Peterson's entire strategy is exposed here: dodge direct questions by claiming they're too complex, then launch into pseudo-philosophical monologues that sound profound but say nothing. When pressed for specifics, retreat into mystical language about logos and archetypes. When cornered, reference the Holocaust or totalitarianism to make your confusion sound morally urgent. The tragedy is that Peterson had legitimate insights about personal responsibility and the dangers of ideological extremism. But he couldn't resist the temptation to transform himself into a guru figure, someone who possessed special knowledge about life's deepest mysteries. In trying to be everything to everyone, psychologist, philosopher, theologian, cultural critic, he became nothing to anyone with actual intellectual standards. This interview reveals the fundamental emptiness at the heart of Peterson's project. He's not a deep thinker grappling with complex questions. He's a marketing genius who figured out how to monetize intellectual insecurity. His audience consists of people who want to feel smart without doing the actual work of thinking clearly. Peterson gives them permission to mistake confusion for profundity, to believe that their inability to answer simple questions is actually a sign of superior wisdom. The most damning aspect of Peterson's performance is how it reveals his complete disconnection from ordinary human experience. Normal people can discuss their beliefs about God, death, and morality without dissolving into philosophical word salad. They understand that some questions have straightforward answers, and that refusing to answer them isn't sophistication, it's intellectual cowardice. Peterson has become a parody of the absent-minded professor, so lost in his own theoretical constructions that he can't navigate basic human conversations. He's the academic equivalent of someone who studied swimming for decades but never learned to get in the water. All theory, no practice. All complexity, no clarity. All questions, no answers. In the end, Peterson's legacy will be that of a man who confused verbosity with wisdom, who mistook neurosis for insight, and who convinced thousands of people that his inability to think clearly was actually a sign of genius. He's the perfect intellectual for our time, someone who can talk for hours without saying anything meaningful, who can appear profound while being completely superficial, and who can build a career on the very intellectual weaknesses he claims to oppose. The emperor has no clothes, but he's convinced himself he's wearing the finest academic robes. And his audience, desperate to believe in something, anything, continues to applaud the performance even as it falls apart before their eyes.